Friends, I'm Mark Macleod, and I'm speaking to you from Nipaluna, Hobart, Moenana country. I honour the traditions of the Palawa people, their sacred beliefs, their care for this beautiful land. When I first moved here to live 4 years ago, my daughter Halcyon Macleod said to me that she'd never lived in a place with so many rainbows. And she was right. Here, every day, it seems, multiple times in a day, there's a rainbow arcing over the city, or here they also sit so close to the ground sometimes that not just the end of the rainbow, but the bow itself lies on the road and you drive through it. She's absolutely right. At my first Hobart yearly meeting, many years ago, I walked outside the meeting house at one of the break times, and there was no one round except a lovely woman sitting on a bench in the sun. I sat down and she said to me, "Hello, I'm Halcyon Evans." And I knew at that moment that I was in a spot where a rainbow had touched the ground. Friends, I felt a deep sense of fear and responsibility when I was asked to offer you an answer to the question, what is the state of the Religious Society of Friends in Australia today? Fear, because I'd listened to State of the Society addresses in recent years, and I'd felt myself sinking under the growing gap between the number of challenges that confront our faith and the declining number of friends available to meet them. Responsibility, because I felt called to bring my optimism and my creativity to the task of helping our community to bridge that gap. Well, friends, I'm happy to report that my fear was not justified. But if you're expecting to hear an annual reading of the balance sheet of membership and attendance, I'm going to disappoint you. One of the most disabling changes in my professional life, and I suspect in your own professional experience, has been a shift in emphasis from quality to quantity. As a young educator, I used to feel grateful that Australian students at least didn't bypass my narrative feedback on their work, as students elsewhere did, and turn straight to the number penciled on the last page of their assignments. Sadly, however, Australian students began to focus solely on that number at the end of the assignment years ago. And we can't blame them, friends. They've grown up in a society that seems to care only about raw statistics and percentages. So if you want a quantified approach to this report, and you need to know how many members and attenders there are in the Religious Society of Friends today, I believe that distinction for a start is an impediment to our growth. And I'm not going to focus on it here. Let's remember two things. First, that early friends were very few in number, and many were young in age, and many were inexperienced. Second, that as any student of storytelling and human endeavour will tell you, one of the most compelling narrative features of human stories is that for thousands of years and in countless communities around the world, the stories of great achievers and great achievements begin with either an individual or a small group expressing fear that they're not up to the task before them. So whatever the numbers on the spreadsheet turn out to be, when you do check them, in the long run, they're not relevant to the question of the quality of our travelling in the spirit. I want to mention in passing, friends, the title of a book by the Swiss writer Rolf de Belli, published in 2020. It's called Stop Reading the News. Now listen, I love our commitment to living in the world rather than removing ourselves from it. And I love our working to create a better world, a fairer world. So I'm not suggesting for a moment that we ignore what's going on about us. But de Belli has a point when he argues that the news is full of events that you can do absolutely nothing about, and that they're being presented solely for their sensational content. And it therefore robs us of the energy and the will to act. In English, we've even developed a word for it, doom scrolling on the internet. That obsessive kind of scrolling down from one disaster or catastrophe to the next has a de-energizing, a debilitating effect on us. If we focus relentlessly on the vastness of the task ahead of us and the poverty of our resources, we risk losing the creativity and determination that have been given to us to make whatever changes we can. As a backyard gardener, I remember the advice of my dear friend, Ro Morrow, saying, you know, what I know in permaculture and what I know from helping people who need this sort of support in other countries is don't focus on the vastness of the piece of land you want to cultivate. Choose a small bit, choose one little meter that you can do and feel that you've accomplished something. I've tried to follow, not always successfully in my own gardening practice. Friends, we live at a time that's almost obsessed with outcomes. How many, how big, how much, how far, how high, how deep, but not a society that's as interested in the journey or the process that led us to those celebrated outcomes. Because it takes time and it's hard slog. I'm reminded of the words about great achievement in Quaker Faith and Practice 21.43. It's been a theme in recent years to refer to the fact of aging in our society. And that's where this quote from Quaker Faith and Practice begins. And I'm quoting from Clifford Haig in 1962. If we're getting older, it will be harder to acknowledge that we have not been called to spectacular service, that we're unlikely now to make a stir in the world, that our former dreams of doing some great healing work had a great deal of personal ambition in them. A great many men and women have had to learn this unpalatable lesson, and then have discovered that magnificent opportunities lay all around them. We need not go to the end of the earth to find them. We need not be young, clever, fit, beautiful, talented, trained, eloquent, or very wise. We shall find them among our neighbours as well as among strangers, in our own families as well as in unfamiliar circles. Magnificent opportunities to be kind and patient and understanding. So what is the quality of our travelling in the spirit? Friends, generally speaking, we're in good shape. Being forced to do less in a physical sense for 2 years has encouraged us to focus on, at last, being Quakers rather than running Quakers. We've been talking about that goal for quite a long time. And we still have a long way to go. During the discernment of how we were going to manage the work of the yearly meeting secretary, for example, I rarely heard the proposition that we could actually do less. There seemed to be an acceptance that the load of administration that everybody complains about was immovable. We just had to find enough people and enough hours to share that burden. I think we're still to evaluate the worth of some of the administration that we accept as a given, because some of what we do has become an end in itself. But the focus on ministry and learning and spiritual nurture reported by all meetings this year suggests that we understand very well where future change and growth will come from. Canberra and region Quakers refer to a journey of rebuilding. You can hear a sigh of relief in every one of this year's regional meeting reports that it was at last safe to hold in-person meetings for worship again. That, as so many friends had wished during the pandemic years, we could get back to normal. But as the US writer Roxane Gay remarked, getting back to normal was the absolute last thing that was wanted by those in need of social justice. So it's been a time of rethinking and reframing the questions. And contrary to the reluctance and even resentment initially expressed at the introduction of online meetings for worship during the pandemic, each meeting this year reports that Zoom has extended and often deepened our spiritual life and brought out the best in our inclusiveness and creativity. We were able in an unprecedented way to include friends who live remotely, for example, or who could not attend a meeting house due to illness or different ability. And also friends whose busy work schedule or family life make them time poor. New South Wales regional meeting reports alternatives tried by local meetings during the pandemic in addition to hybrid meetings. For example, outdoor meetings for worship, small home meetings with appropriate protocols, breakfast groups. Even with the return to in-person worship, meetings report the successful inclusion of strategies learned during the pandemic. And there seems to be no reason now to abandon hybrid meetings, since we have upgraded our technology and our skills in handling it. Naturally, there's still some uncertainty. When I hear an occasional friend express a refusal to engage with the technology, and one meeting this year does mention the refusal of some friends to do so, I'm reminded of my parents many years ago saying that television would fry our brains out. Or further back, that those audiences who were terrified at the first moving pictures of a steam train because they thought that it might actually come through the wall of the theatre. Or further back again, the people in the 19th century who said that reading novels would send us all mad. On the whole, we learned during the pandemic years that the technology itself was not the problem. Regional meetings report that we have learned to manage the technology to our advantage, and that where there is still fear, what is required is not ostracism, but continued support for learning by friends who feel lack of confidence. One concern expressed by several meetings is that while meetings for worship for business, and yearly meeting have all proved both possible and convenient online, we're still searching for ways to engage with the social needs that are best satisfied by in-person meetings. Zoom is sometimes called a cold medium. Our presiding clerk suggests this year that perhaps a way to warm it up is to make the Zoom gallery less stiffly formal by using our hands and our facial expressions appropriately. When I started working in television many years ago, I do, as you can tell, use my hands to speak. I was instructed in no uncertain terms to keep my hands out of it, that it was all about the face, that's it. I think it's really interesting that the kind of advice that our presiding clerk suggests might be a way of using the technology differently from the way that we thought you did with a head in a frame some years ago. Meetings around the world have found that they need to accompany online or hybrid meetings with more shared lunches, more discussion groups, more working bees, and more in-person opportunities for pastoral care and political action, which are increasingly important for rebuilding the community. You know, for people who find conversation difficult, and we all do in some situations, I certainly do, it becomes less of a challenge when you're simply walking with a person in a rally, standing in a vigil, digging in a garden, painting a wall, serving coffee or biscuits. There's something that you have to do, a shared task, which proves a useful distraction from the difficulty that you might have with one-on-one conversation. And you'll find that doing that work together, in fact, builds a community and builds relationships that you remember, you hang on to. They become quite long-lasting, just simply out of doing the work together. Meetings around the world, then, have found that we need to find ways of being more creative in person. That doesn't mean dumping online communication or hybrid communication. It means augmenting it. As I read those concerns, I wonder if we're using technology as creatively as we could. The Quakers Australia Facebook site is a friendly source of information and inspiration about history and faith. And it has appealing video clips and links to reading resources, and I admire it. Look, I know all the reasons that people are cautious about Facebook, about submitting to Facebook. But again, it's a tool, and it's how we use it that will prove either beneficial or not. The aim of the Quakers Australia Facebook page is information rather than fellowship and fun. Outside of my meeting life, I've recently become a member of 2 online Facebook groups in Tasmania. One's called The Unusual Suspects, and the other one's called That's It, I'm Moving to Tassie. These are both private groups. They're accessed by invitation, and they're moderated, so they're safe to the degree that they can be. And the requirement is that you should have recently moved to Tasmania or be intending to do so. So there's a kind of a point to joining a group like this. And on those pages, weekly walks and lunches, afternoon tea, swap meets are organised by members. There are terrific chats. There are photographs posted. Now, the photographs are what make those pages different from e-notices. That they're not just purely verbal information, they're visual information. And we're very, very visual society now. So these sites are jumping with energy, and they change every day. And we know from research into the internet that people lose interest in a particular site or a page if it's not different when they turn up to it next time when they log in. Might this be a way of organising social contacts that appears less formal than either the official pages or the weekly e-notices announcements? Silver Wattle has developed an engaging Facebook page, which includes us in the dailiness of life in that special place. So friends actually have the precedence. Perhaps we're missing an opportunity. And I can't help observing that the thing about those pages is that they're enjoyable, they're fun. In my professional work, it's one of the constant dilemmas that people in storytelling, in literature, in film, and so on, there's a long-standing assumption that if you are serious in purpose, you don't produce a narrative that's too entertaining. That somehow there's some kind of guilt attached, or an assumption of superficiality attached to being warm and entertaining and engaging. I totally reject that binary. So I wonder if we're missing opportunities because we've kind of worried that those sorts of contexts are too ephemeral to be taken seriously. After the pandemic, all meetings acknowledge reduced numbers of those attending in-person meetings for worship, but they also report steady growth. And they report a number of new inquiries, some of which have resulted in regular attendance and applications for membership. The months, the years of lockdown were a time of reflection for not just faith communities, but for everyone. And one result has clearly been people looking for a new direction in life and turning to communities that clearly have a purpose. So how does our online presence reflect what they might find if they approached us? In a world in which everyone seems to be reaching out, either in person or on any number of platforms, does our traditional fear of proselytizing make us appear aloof, uninterested, indifferent, cold even? Do we need to rethink that traditional reluctance? How might we manage greater outreach with integrity. The Quakers Australia site looks well organised and purposeful, but it doesn't also look as though it might be enjoyable to be involved with it, maybe even warm and fun. Those desires are not incompatible, friends. West Australia Regional Meeting expresses a desire for meetings to become more inclusive. Several meetings are searching for ways to include young people in particular. One interesting outcome of the pandemic years was that while older friends found online technology a challenge, for young people it was all too familiar, and what emerged as a need for them was in-person social connection. That remains a challenge because the number of families with children recorded in membership lists is not aligned with the number actually attending meeting for worship. What could we be doing to close that gap? How do we reach them? Some meetings report a variety of family-friendly social gatherings, and that seems to be clearly a need coming out of this year's State of Society report. The need to find new ways of including children and young people is about ensuring a future for the Religious Society of Friends, but we need to be inclusive in other ways too. Some meetings report success in bringing isolation to an end with Know Your Friend days. Some meetings have organised opportunities for greater learning in the lead up to the referendum on an Aboriginal voice for Parliament. Friends in Stitches continues to be an inspiring example of a group of friends coming together with a special interest. Rainbow Friends and Allies online meeting and Friends Online Recognised meeting both address inclusion in different ways, which are deepening our spiritual lives and connections across vast distances and different time zones. So at a time when so many reports in the media are about the divisiveness of technology, technology is in fact making inclusion easier. Because all meetings report that nominations committees find the bringing forward of names for various roles increasingly difficult, though, what opportunities are we offering new attenders to belong to and to serve the community that they've become interested in? How are we adjusting to the scope of the roles we ask friends to accept? And how creative are we being in the discernment process? I wonder whether we've fully realised that the willingness of our parents and our grandparents to join a committee for 3 years and to attend regular monthly meetings might not be shared by busy families and younger people today. Perhaps accepting the gig economy instead of judging it and asking someone to join a group for a few months or a working party until a specific task is completed and they can move on is a strategy better aligned with working and family lives now. Perhaps we need to rethink our reliance on committees. And how long do you have to attend meeting for worship to be asked whether your name can be brought forward for a role in the life of the meeting? You know, not all roles in the life of the meeting depend on a deep and long-standing knowledge of Quaker process and Quaker history. Why do we keep asking the same people again and again simply because they have that knowledge? We don't have to explain anything. We don't have to mentor them in a sense. All meetings report the exhaustion experienced by care committees, in particular during the pandemic years. And one regional meeting was even asked to consider laying down the role of a care committee altogether. One answer to this dilemma is to be perhaps more focused in the work that we're trying to do, to encourage more friends to join in, however limited they feel their time and talents are, and to make sure that they're nurtured spiritually in the work that they undertake and that they're encouraged to learn and to grow. And working together with them is an opportunity to get to know one another and to build a community. As has always been the case, regional meetings report this year inspiring action for peace and justice. And there is in all reports an awareness that Quakers are called to respond to climate change and species extinction as never before. Some meetings have chosen to make this a standing item on the agenda of meetings for worship for business. Other meetings, concerned that making it a standing item might in fact dull our motivation, have chosen not to do so. Regardless of the approach, the urgency is acknowledged across the country. Many friends also feel led to support the Integrity of Public Office project, driven by New South Wales Regional Meeting. And they share Santrum's concern about the increasing militarisation of not just Australia's foreign affairs, but its domestic policy as well. But as Westchester Meeting in the United States asks, where should we best put the energy of a smaller group of people? We're called on to return to our testimonies, friends, and in prayerful and quiet discernment, enable them to guide our next steps forward. There are many possibilities for reframing and reaffirming our testimonies, and the state of our society is that we are listening. We're listening for them. I'm excited by the possibilities. We're taking it slowly, carefully, prayerfully, perhaps because we want to make sure that the reframing is sound. And I understand that that's frustrating for some people who want action to be faster. In 2023, everyone has a microphone, everyone has a platform. And one of the downsides of the way the internet has been used by many people is that it's about being in the tent or out of it, being on the team or not. It's a yes-no proposition. But the challenging difference that friends can make to this process is that it's not about the number of people you can recruit to your view. And the guidance of Quaker Faith and Practice 2.90 speaks to our condition. I'm quoting from John Puncheon, 1987. What is required is a willingness to listen to what others have to say, rather than to persuade them that one's own point of view represents what's right and proper. It also requires restraint. The reiteration of one point by several friends, each in their own way, lends no weight to the point. What the meeting must learn to discern is its rightness, not how many people support it. When conflict comes, as it does, and the temptation to compromise, to seek consensus is resisted, the sense of divine guidance is unmistakably registered. New possibilities for a way forward, which nobody's thought of, emerge out of discussion. Postponement and delay settle minds and assist the process of coming to a united mind. Above all, those who take opposing views come to find that the discipline of waiting has mysteriously united them. And that, friends, is the way forward. But at the same time, I'm strongly drawn to a line in the report from Queensland Regional Meeting, and I'll finish with those words. In August, several friends attended the funeral and celebration of the life of one of our long-term attenders and a great contributor to the Brisbane local meeting, Jenny Woodrow. And these were the words she left for us. Have fun, be kind, laugh. A simple yet challenging proposal